So, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I know we're winding down to the end of the semester. Super happy to have Barbara Bestor, my old pal from LA, in town for her first visit to Columbus. This lecture is also co-sponsored by Columbus AIA. So before I introduce Barbara formally, I'm going to turn it over to John Megan, who's the president of AIA Columbus this year, to say a few words, and then I'll be right back.
All right, I'll keep it brief. Thank you, Todd, and thank you for having us on board. This is something that actually we used to do all the time back years ago, and this year we thought, let's try this again, give our practitioners an opportunity to come out and see some high-level design and mix it up a little bit. So I just don't have a whole lot tonight. I just wanted just make a comment. This year we have done some realignment with the chapter and our goals. One specific thing is aligning ourselves strategically, again, strengthening our alliances with our allied organizations, specifically KSA is one of that group. We definitely understand the importance of the work that's being done here by our students and how that is a pipeline to the Central Ohio industry, the architectural trades. I personally have brought on several interns over the past few years and continue to be impressed by the work that's coming out of the school. We have just last night was our first kickoff for a new program that we launched. It's called Archways. So as you're coming out of school, keep an eye out for that. It's an alliance with our chapter, local firms, and a formalized mentorship program that we think will be helpful for both firms and young practitioners. Last weekend was the AIAS Quad Conference. Most of you know we sponsor a golf outing every year and are proud to support the KSA Associateship Program. And we were able to raise a little more money and help the students with the Quad Conference. So that was a lot of fun. The lecture series tonight, we're glad to bring you on board to see Barbara's work. And I guess we don't have our slides, but I just want to say thank you to our key sponsors, if any of you are here. Pella Windows, Carol Meyer, Design Pro, Brad Bush, with insurance for our needs as architects. We have to have some insurance from time to time. And Paul J. Ford, David Grubbs, sponsors us at the top level as well. So that's that. We did hand out tickets. We want to invite our members over to the Blackwell for our reception following the lecture. Thank you very much. Todd?
Okay, so thanks, John. We're really excited to be sort of re-partnering up with AIA. I think it's a good connection to have, and so let's make this the first of many collaborations in the lecture series. So I'm really happy to be able to welcome Barbara, newly christened FAIA, last year, right? So as is custom, a few professional and disciplinary bona fides. Barbara, for those of you who do not know, is the founder of the LA-based firm Bestor Architecture. She's the Julius Shulman Distinguished Professor of Practice and Executive Director of the Julius Shulman Institute at Woodbury University in Burbank. She's the winner of countless awards and accolades, too many for me to list off here. And she is a longtime fixture in the Southern California contemporary architecture scene. And so all that is fantastic, and I don't mean to brush over that too quickly, but the reason that I wanted Barbara to come and speak with us tonight is not her CV. It has more to do with, it's much more simple. I mean, I just think Barbara is really cool, and I thought it was important to share that. Now, I don't mean to make too light. Like coolness is a kind of important concept, I would say, in Los Angeles architecture. And Barbara really, I think, has her finger on the pulse of what makes LA cool. And so I just wanted to say a few words about that could maybe help orient or things to look for as the slides go by today. And I think the big thing about LA, or one of the big things that makes LA interesting and a cool place to work, is that it's a city of paradoxes, and these paradoxes are something that Barbara, I think, really understands. She really understands how they work, and she really understands how to make architecture out of them. So, I mean, we all understand that LA modernism is kind of, it benefits quite a lot from the weather in LA, right? I mean, you know, that weather is particularly amenable to openness and transparency and the kind of dreams that were maybe a little bit harder to achieve in snowy, cold Europe. But LA was always pretty good at that. But at the same time, we understand that LA, you know, if on one hand the weather drives us towards openness and transparency, there's also a really kind of clear attachment to individual autonomy in the city, which drives an architect toward kind of contrasting positions of, let's say, seclusion and privacy and a kind of tightly guarded kind of precinct attitude. And so that contradiction, I think, is something that you'll see in Barbara's work. LA, of course, is a city of a fair amount of wealth, and it's kind of famed for an attention to kind of polish and a certain manicured luxury. At the same time, and I think more pervasively, LA is like pretty gritty. It's very kind of down and dirty. It's got a DIY sensibility. There's a very clear, well, in Barbara's own terms, bohemian undercurrent that I think that dyad, I think she understands very clearly as well. It's a city of stars who are, you know, kind of carefully crafted by consultants and managers and agents. And Barbara is certainly a kind of not a rising star anymore. It's a like fully risen star within the LA architecture scene. But LA is also a city of anonymous oddballs and people who are just kind of doing their own thing. And Barbara's a bit of an oddball as well. And I think her clients are equally the rich and famous and the odd and idiosyncratic. And I really like that as well. Another thing is that LA is a city that's made of immigrants and made for invention. I mean, everybody in LA is from somewhere else, Barbara included. She was raised in Massachusetts, educated at Harvard before going to SCI-Arc to finish architectural education. And so in a way, you know, everybody in LA is from somewhere else, and as often as not, they're in the process of becoming someone else. And that dynamic, I think, you'll see in Barbara's architecture. I mean, the work really helps to enable these kinds of transformations or blossomings that are so much part of the kind of lifestyle of LA. And so I would say that these paradoxes, and I could go on and on kind of elaborating these are a lot of what makes LA such a fun place to work. And I think Barbara's ability to negotiate them with such kind of finesse is what makes her one of the most exciting practitioners working in that city today. So I'm super happy she's here, and please help me welcome Barbara Bestor.
Thank you for a lovely introduction, Todd. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. No, it's funny, I used to often do a talk about sunshine and smog as a sort of good way of looking at LA architecture, that the sort of modernism, transparency, dialogue, et cetera, of the sunshine, but then the LA school, like the 70s kind of Gehry, Morphosis, Errico and Moss being sort of currently popularly described as sort of a smog thing, that you sort of have an AC-DC current in LA architecture. Well, I'm just showing, this is sort of just to ground where I'm coming from. This is my office in Silverlake. I've been in Silverlake for a long time, but I finally got like a permanent home, and I'm just sort of showing it off really. But it's a kind of an open space. This is like the dream in LA architecture is to get a bowstring truss building. I have two. I mean, I don't own them, but I have two for my office. And the big thing that we did was I sort of organized it around, like the front entry is around this kind of kitchen cafe thing that ends up being like a hub for the office a lot of the time. And that's my collaborators and partners in crime. Right now we have about 25 people. It is largely female, which is just sort of coincidental, but I think it's funny given the other statistics out there. I put this up just because this is sort of, you know, because we're in school, and there's a way of thinking about influence and sort of new movements in architecture. This is an old quote from Margaret Crawford, and she's talking more about sort of the high modernism and the Venturis, but I think that there's certainly a current moment. I think your lecture poster is a good example of it, where kind of, let's say, the hyper digital formalism that was pretty popular until recently is sort of turning again into some other stuff, and I think some of it might be discussed in terms of the sort of high-low influences. And I think some of what I do is maybe in this department of looking for other sources for kind of information, ideas, formal, graphic, etc. This building ended up being a big influence on me. This is the Unabomber's cabin, which is in the FBI hangar. And the reason I show it is that at some point I was, around 9/11, I got divorced. I was like really angry, and I was looking for a house, and I bought this one, which reminded me of the Unabomber camera. And I thought it was sort of, I was just like, I just needed a home that looked sort of like a home, and whatever. And so I started doing models for what I would do to it. And first I was going to stack these railroad ties around it and kind of make it like a preserved shell. And then I was going to clad it in mirror glass and just leave the framing. And I ended up doing something much cheaper and simpler, which was this very simple house. But this became a home for myself and my 2 daughters and our dog. And it became a little bit of a laboratory. I did it probably over the course of 5 or 6 months, just kind of building it with some contractors. And one of the ideas in it was sort of for a house that had these sort of crazy eights of circulation, so that a kid on a tricycle could kind of run inside and outside and make all these loops, and similarly adults at a cocktail party could kind of avoid each other if they wanted by looping around. So there's a lot of outdoor rooms as well as indoor rooms. Let's see. And that project, it got published a lot. It was weird. It was sort of, in the end, I thought just kind of a side project, but it ended up getting me this book deal to do a book on, I would call it the kind of suppressed narrative of modernism in LA, which to me was these very eccentric endeavors by people like Gregory Ain or Schindler or Neutra that were a little bit about LA and some of the issues that Todd was talking about, but also about the clientele, which in the neighborhood that this book is about, Silverlake, were often people working in the movie business, or it was kind of a less segregated area. It was more politically left. Anyhow, so I was kind of, I think I did this in 2004, and it was a time when people still thought of modern architecture in a more antiseptic way, kind of a, glass, steel, Vasily chair kind of way. And so I wanted to show this illustration of these other versions of modernism. A friend of mine, Jeff McFetridge, who's a kind of renowned graphic artist and artist, did illustrations. So this is his illustration of the Schindler chapter. That's Schindler in the corner drawing. And the book itself was intentionally laid out as a sort of different kind of project than like a Swiss modernist, monograph about architecture. So I worked with this guy, Michael Worthington, who's at CalArts, and we developed this sort of language of like a graphic language and a more informal way of presenting it. So all the houses are photographed kind of with the stuff in them as it is, ersatz. And in a way, I guess that kind of speaks to what has then, like since then, sort of become an issue for me, is that looking at like diverse sources of inspiration, and I'm particularly interested in strategies that are two-dimensional strategies like color or text that can add a lot of atmosphere to a building without that much cost. But so it's kind of like a third layer of architecture, and I see things like the kind of history of kind of informal painting on buildings, and this is an artist working on a project about that same issue, but kind of the palette of some of the LA as it was when I moved there. Right now, LA is very influenced by stuff going on in Vietnam and China, but funnily, and for LA right now, all the architects, all we ever do is talk about Mexico City. Mexico City is the cool place to be. If you want to go somewhere cool, you can skip LA apparently and go to Mexico City, but there is a kind of new emphasis on color. And this motto is sort of our office's saying for a while, and still is, I guess. And the idea was to take both the Russian formalist idea of art is making strange. So the idea that you could take something everyday, sort of familiar things, and by looking at them differently or portraying them differently or tweaking them slightly, would sort of create a moment of art where there's sort of like a pause in one's reading of that thing. And then the idea of the everyday as well being a kind of like how can we as architects influence daily life more? How do we enhance that? And for a long time for me, that was at a pretty small scale. So I did a lot of projects that are houses, and these are some of my house projects. I've done a lot of things in those houses that are kind of experiments with color and material and kind of creating new palettes for living and maybe kind of, again, enhancing, daily life where it's a bathroom or a funny kitchen. And some bigger houses along the way. And I guess in that exploration of domesticity, maybe kicked off by my own house a while ago, looking at different types of domestic arrangements. I feel like one of the things you see when you study sort of the history of domestic architecture is a lot of normative arrangements of things. Kitchens are like this, whatever. And I think as we change our lifestyles, family structures are different, people's attention span is different. You're trying to get your kids away from their devices. I'm speaking as a parent, but how do you create places that are kind of communal within your home, which you would think would be a home, would be typical in domestic space, but these days, can be quite segregated around the domestic sphere. And I've done a lot of retail and kind of restaurants and things, and again, those are for me anyhow, and for Californians, I think often restaurants or cafes become like a hub for social activity, kind of like they're not quite as lefty as the Jürgen Habermas coffee shop analogy, but there is something about that where they become social nodes and even like living rooms for the city. And so what I wanted to show was sort of bigger projects that are looking at different kinds of community and how to build that into your architecture, as well as using these sort of additional strategies. So Blackbirds is a project that is a small lot subdivision, which is a weird LA thing, but it's something that the city, in its desire to densify, has created some tools to create much smaller lots out of existing ones. So you can kind of take, say, 5 lots, which is what this project is, and subdivide them into infinitely smaller pieces as long as you can provide parking on them. So in this case, this lot that was, let's see here, this is the existing 5 lots, and this would be the typical small lot scenario, is that sort of railroad thing in the middle where you sort of cut it up and each thing is its own sort of disconnected thing. What I was looking at was, or what we proposed, was this idea of stealth density, where we both maybe took some of the wind out of the NIMBYism of denser housing, which we have a lot of in LA, and also looked for an opportunity for building community. So in Blackbirds, the plan is built around a communal parking court using the idea of the Wooner for the living street, kind of like a Dutch idea where by day, the cars are not there, and you have this sort of park-like space, and at night cars come in and it becomes more filled. But I also set it up so that all of the each of these houses, this is 18 individual little houses. They're sold independently as houses. There's about 8 inches of separation between some of the ones that are pushed together. All of their kitchens look into that parking lot, and all of into the central park, I guess, and the entrance, their primary entrances are all there. So you sort of have this built-in kind of Knots Landing for people my age type of scenario, and this is the massing of it. So there's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing where often there's a set of 2 houses, it looks like one house, and sometimes 3 houses look like 2 houses. And that's sort of that's where the kind of fun part starts, where there's like a sort of a graphic, formal language that's sort of telling a couple different things. This cutaway sort of shows the arrangement of things. But like say this unit is 3 individual houses with a strip that you hopefully can't see that kind of separates them for seismic. And this is a section through that. So as we go down, it was a very complicated hillside. And so a lot of the houses are sort of embedded in different ways into the hill. So these guys each have a different relationship to the parking thing on the back, but they also address the street on the front. And one of the ways of making like essentially pretty low cost housing units have a more architectural quality from the interior is by leaving the ceilings open. So we have sort of exaggerated ceilings, ceiling heights and pitches, but also those are for the most part left open so that as you're going up the stairs, you kind of have this real sense of a more majestic height, like in this drawing illustration. And there's really large openings. We used industrial storefronts generally for the openings. And these are some pictures of it lately as the landscapes are growing in. That's the parking court. So here's a section. So the ones on the lower part are literally embedded in the hill. There's a large concrete retaining wall, and they are kind of facing out more towards the back. And this is the manifestation. And my favorite thing that happened, which was my dream in life really, was that the neighbors have all become rather friendly as they are forced through the architect's social engineering. But this was like a communal dinner party that like 9 of the houses had together, and I got invited by one of the house owners, and it was like we sort of took over the parking court, and I can't believe I didn't get a photographer to come, and I just have my bad shots. But that's sort of, it's interesting. It's been very, very successful. It's one of them is for sale now, and the prices are going up. But yeah, this is how it looks sort of from the streetscape. So also from the neighbor point of view, it has worked out pretty well because it's kind of added to the texture of the neighborhood. We really did study the massing of the existing houses in Echo Park and match them. This is a project that I just am showing. It's kind of funny. I did this maybe 10 years ago, and it was a coffee shop for one of the first third wave coffee companies coming to LA, Intelligentsia Coffee, and it was their flagship. And I had just been to Turkey, and I was really interested in tile, and I kind of got into this idea of creating a sort of tile runway from the street up into this place that would sort of gather people together and also just provide, the graphic signage. And then on the top of it, you have sort of old world tile thing on the top, a kind of Donald Judd box, and the barista, like a lowered counter for the barista that sort of becomes the theatrical setting between the customer and the fancy coffee. It became very popular, and it's got its own life on Instagram, where like it means you've been to Silverlake if you post this picture. And it also has been nominated for like best public space by a lot of people because it did sort of provide this corner in the neighborhood that has become quite a communal hangout. And another project down the block, I guess I do a lot of stuff in Silverlake, although lately I've been expanding. This is a project for the Silverlake Conservatory of Music, which was it's a rehab of an existing former warehouse building. And this is a music school started by Flea from the Chili Peppers, and it provides low-cost music instruction to private students, but also has a whole huge nonprofit function for students who can't afford to pay, kind of replacing the music education programs that have been defunded in California. And we sort of stripped back the front and then added some brickwork. We couldn't really afford to do it with glazed tile, but on the inside, there's a kind of facade that's really about older Hollywood, and on the inside, there's these sort of different structures that really segregate different communities and then also bring them together. So the front lobby is really a living room for the musicians who teach there and the parents waiting for their kids. And then there's this kind of interior street with the lesson rooms that's for the kids taking lessons, built around this reflective box, which houses a rather large amount of bathrooms that we had to have for our assembly place, which is the back space. So it's a kind of a multiple multiple kind of groups and communities sort of overlapping in the space. So I have a little video of the kind of walkthrough of the inside.
They don't have chocolate by them? Diana,
so we actually recreated their original space a little bit on the outside with this sort of old fun furniture that Feliz had put in the first space that they had. So this is almost like a little museum of the original building that they were in. And then this is our kind of Caligari corridor for kids with their rehearsal rooms. This is sort of the architecture of the interiors. And this volume with the super graphic is I kind of call it like the disco ball. There were some existing skylights and we added one, and we were really using it to refract light around. We didn't have a choice about the quantity of bathrooms that we had, and rather than kind of tucking them to the side and pushing everything in the middle, by just making it a kind of a mute ball-like thing in the middle, it both allowed me to sort of have this sort of smaller scale circulation, but also move light around the center. And then the theater itself, the assembly hall, just takes advantage of the building's original structure. And that's from the opening. This just opened less than a year ago. Another little project along the same, in the sort of neighborhood sign. This is a project we're working on for a senior citizen group in Los Feliz that is looking to move across the street and convince the parks to let them build a real space. They have these trailers right now. And so we have been doing a study, and then this is our kind of proposed rendering that we're using for fundraising for them. So we were making a multi-purpose space and then a kind of extended porch onto the main street that becomes like a porch for the seniors to sit on, but also for kind of interaction. There's a couple of kids parks and soccer fields around there, so it becomes sort of like a public zone in the city that can also double as a rental function. A different kind of urbanism is some stuff that we've been doing a fair amount of these large tenant improvement sort of tech campus projects lately, and this is one for Beats By Dre Headphones, which is now Apple Music, or owned by Apple Music. And this was a two-story typewriter warehouse in Culver City, right near Erico and Moss's territory. And we were kitty corner from his office, actually. So what we did, we sort of took this existing building, we cut two big atrium spaces and one long corridor through the middle, creating kind of these different sources of light. It had a very low ceiling, floor to floor plates, but we were trying to create pieces of expansion and also a language that was sort of about Beats. So like here in the lobby, these are red Beats cords, which is their sort of signature headphone cord, kind of tied around the columns. There's a hilarious amount of columns in this building that are not on any grid, and unfortunately we were not allowed to remove any because the way this whole area of Culver City is built on fill next to a creek that basically if you take a column out, you're building like a 100-foot caisson each time. So you don't take any columns, you just wrap them in red cords. So this is that main street which connects the parking garage for the employees on one end and the main lobby on the other, and was intentionally done as a sort of dramatic museum stair kind of, so that it was sort of this public space that would really try and connecting the upper floor and the lower floor. On the left is a lot of mirrored stainless steel and a boardroom and a cafe that is kind of placed so that it becomes a check-in place for everybody coming from the parking garage, and also sort of during the day a hangout space. And then one of the atriums is organized for the people who are running the ops department. This is the thing when you're doing, this is a campus for about 500 people, 600 people. You have many different groups. You have engineers, marketing people, ops people, kind of different lifestyles and work styles. And so there's, within each area, there are some different kinds of smaller scale difference. But on a larger scale, this group are the people who move shipping containers around at midnight, our midnight in the South Seas, and they're on a kind of weird schedule. They wanted a very calm, almost library-like sort of atmosphere, and that the blueness in some of the furniture in here became that space. We had built out all the skylights that are in here. And around each of these atrium are located these open meeting rooms that have a kind of village-like windows onto each other and into the larger space. So there's a sense of kind of visual community building across the spaces. And there's also a lot of connecting bits like this, which are built around those aforementioned columns, but also taking those as opportunities for bits of millwork or bits of gathering. This became like one of the most Instagram spaces in the Beats campus. And you can kind of see from one connector piece through the cafe to the other piece, to the other atrium. This one is for the marketing people and was sort of done more as a stripped down, all whiteboard art school environment. They wanted to kind of be able to put up their ongoing projects for branding. And there's a secret stair next to that main stair that's really like the stair for the introvert who doesn't want to go down a big museum stair every time they want to go get a cup of coffee, and we wrap that in this brass laminate and kind of created a different sort of private zone in there. These are some of the graphics that so because again this is such a large spread out footprint, we kind of set it up with quadrants defined by color in order to help with wayfinding, and then we developed a whole bunch of wallpapers that are pretty simple to use throughout the space. So those are usually in meeting rooms, and they're also signifiers on doors, so you kind of know like, oh, I'm in the blue zone, I'm in the green zone, but it's pretty subtle. The idea was to not make the graphics kind of in your face, except in some places, this is the celebrity zone. This is the zone where the executives are, and like LeBron James is coming over to, do something. So that it has its own back stair, and we thought it'd be funny to make all that stuff kind of gold and silver and blingy. And this is another one of the executive offices where we did a pattern more about Beats. We also commissioned a lot of photographs from E1 Bond. We had him fly around LA in a helicopter and take pictures of some places that were important to the guys who founded Beats, but also places that were kind of different points of view about LA, and we used those as super graphics in some of the different meeting rooms and some of the larger spaces to kind of give a sense of rootedness. I think with Beats, because they were kind of a tech business, but kind of really, they were coming from the music business, which is a very different gestalt. They were kind of looking for ways to keep it about LA, keep it fun, like the sort of music thing, but also be tech friendly. This was actually a whiteboard that we made. Usually I use this for my sunshine versus smog talk, but it looks like smog, but it's really just morning haze. But what was kind of fun is you can use an image like that and make it a whiteboard by a special treatment. Another campus we have been working on a lot of buildings for is Snapchat in Santa Monica, who are moving from Venice. And we have been working very quickly going through these existing buildings and changing them. This one used to be the Museum of Flying in Santa Monica. And we developed this palette and language that had to do with bringing nature in. This building is defined by some really big chunks of space that don't have windows, although they have some indirect light. And so I was looking to use a language where there's wood, there's graphics that we made that are leaf-y, and then there's all the different materials of the fabric kind of look like sisal, although it's not. And we created a couple of these freestanding structures in there's two big warehouse volumes that become like an informal meeting area inside. So something like this, a lot of these windows have been covered, and we kind of opened everything up, and that's one of our free-form meeting rooms. There's a lot of informal meeting space. So again, you're kind of almost doing urban design when you do projects like this, because this is probably 200 people in here, and so different kinds of spaces for different kinds of work and activity, but also different kinds of people. This is like a waiting room for the HR department for people being interviewed. We used some of the snap yellow very sparingly to highlight the structure in the building. That's sort of before they moved in. This is how one of those meeting rooms work. Kind of defining in this big plate of desks, kind of like a more sort of special space that helped organize the space around it. And here's another concept. This is a concept project for a part of Apple that was a media thing where they're taking there's a warehouse below that we're sort of stuffing a lot of their programs of performance and recording, and then designing a place above it that was sort of for artists and people working there. So you kind of would think of I call it a super studio. It's like a whole movie studio compressed into a box, and then above it you go in and out depending on what you're doing below. So that's sort of what that section, the cloud is the part that we would be building new, and then we'd be rebuilding the lower part. This is the cloud part, and that's sort of looking down into some performance space. There's a view of it. On another totally different thing, but again, kind of in the California as the home of technology and design tip, which is kind of a big thing that's going on in California. This is a Lautner house called Silvertop that I was working on for about 3 years and just finished recently. And it's this amazing house that's really built around these sort of infrastructural principles. Lautner was working with his client, Reiner was a manufacturer of metal clips for the World War II, and then later on turned that into sort of a hair clip business after the war and made a lot of money in clips, and wanted to use the house as a kind of research project. He even had a big fight with the tax bureau about whether he could write off the whole house as a research project. But they were kind of looking at like the house of the future projects within this structure. So there's an 85-foot concrete shell span. This is the first the concrete shell that Lautner did, and they'd gone to look at Nervi's Olympic Stadium, and they'd looked at, in Uruguay, they've sort of did a lot of homework in how to kind of start to use these new infrastructural technologies. The house itself is built around these 2 brick walls, which are those visible curves, and then the spanning concrete shell goes over the living room there. The house was never finished. It was abandoned in like 1965 because Reiner ran out of money, and then it sold in the early 70s to a couple who kind of moved in and patched up some stuff, but hadn't really ever been completely finished. And my client bought it from those people. These are some construction photos. So this is built between, let's say, 60 and 65. Kind of freeway technology here with this 20-foot cantilever driveway. And so my client is also from the tech world and wanted to add a whole layer of technology under the existing kind of visible technology. And so what we ended up doing was creating a whole lot of analog, let's say, interfaces or user experience moments, and then with a pretty big digital background, which is stored in the conveniently complicated tunnels that go underneath this house. So this is a brass plate that's engraved with patterns that Jeff McFetridge, who I work with a lot, did, that are kind of a language, a hieroglyphics, if you will, of things in the house that have movement or any of the sort of technologies that are in there. So there's a sort of dictionary that goes with the house. Oh, and here's some of the moving parts. So some of these are ours that we added, and some of them are original. Part of what we did was make some of the technology work better. A lot of the machines had been kind of built in a way that you might have done in 1960, but the motors and stuff weren't up to snuff. This is the amazing space of the large living room interior. And the house is very transparent, so it has the illusion of being the top of a hill. The shell becomes like the top of a hill, and below it is glass. We also add a lot of, then what was nice, as an architect, I was able to build out a kitchen and a master bathroom and add some pieces there because those were parts that had never been finished originally. Most of the house is a restoration, and then the parts that were unfinished were kind of fair game. But the logic that we used with a lot of historians consulting was to take the same cypress. The house has a lot of horizontal bands of cypress, and take that same material, but anything that we were doing new, we would run it vertically with these thin strips. It also allowed us to do a more organic language of cabinetry than had been in the original house. So our pieces are kind of undulating wooden pieces that are sort of inserts into the bigger shells, but also read as contemporary and therefore don't, clutter the historical record. These are some pieces. So there's an existing terrarium, and the ceiling scape is existing, as are those amazing columns, but then our kind of kitchen project wanders around it. We did several weeks of research at the Getty, who has all the drawings for the house. These are some of the other rooms. We automated a lot of these shutters that had been manual originally. This is a new interior for a bathroom that hadn't been finished, and we put in there's a 5-ton piece of glass that goes into a motor down into the floor. We kind of dug out a tunnel. It's probably the most expensive thing we did in the house, and there's similarly a frameless glass skylight, so you can push a button and make it an outdoor shower in this garden. It's very nice. I'm like, when do I get to house it? That hasn't happened yet. So these are some of this is sort of how the original house worked. There were also the lighting, it had like no light at night, so that was one of the great things we were able to do, is like without changing anything, but architecture kind of really illuminate it, using a lot of LEDs and stuff for evening. It has the first horizon pool. And this is a guest house that's part of the driveway that goes around. It's cantilevering off of this cylindrical structure. So this is the overall campus, as it were. A while ago, I did a project, an installation in the gallery at SCI-Arc, and it's this space that's often used by architecture firms, or given to architecture firms to do a project for a month or two. And I wanted to do a project that was for the students, and at the time I thought people were just spending way too much time on their computer and not having enough fun, and so I thought it'd be good to do a disco in the space. And so this is this project where I took it's also kind of a joke, because there was also a preponderance of polyhedrons going on in school at the time. I was teaching, I was like, oh, enough with the polyhedron. So I took a polyhedron and then unpacked it using pepakura, and then that became the structure. So the unpacked kind of shape, including the tabs and stuff, is the shape of this project. It's a little meta, but it's made out of plywood with these inset sort of laser cut mirror plexi, and then also a layer of sort of super graphics. So this is the disco floor became the sort of central space, and it was, I think I was working on Beats at the time, so I got Beats to donate speakers, so anyone could come along and plug in their iPhone and turn it into a disco, on a slow night. And there was also a space, what I was really interested in was the sort of the other space. So you have this dance floor, as it were, the main floor, but you also have the residual space of the kind of unfolded pieces. And that we used sort of a tinted color. We built in little beds and banquettes and kind of resting spaces. So there was sort of like an underside to that installation. This is Denise Scott Brown, but I guess it's particularly relevant these days, but I got sort of interested and concerned about, women architects and designers getting left out of the Wikipedia. At the time, a couple of years ago, there was kind of, everyone was suddenly realizing that if you didn't have an article about that person published since the digital era, they sort of disappear from the record, because more and more students are only using digital sources, and not every book is scanned. And so I got interested in kind of a curatorial project of bringing people back into the current digital record by doing shows about them, getting articles written, getting their work archived, et cetera. So one of the first things I did about that was a project about Deborah Sussman. Deborah Sussman worked with Gary. She worked for the Eameses a long time ago, but she was particularly known for her work on the LA Olympics. 1984 Olympics were this wild, let's see, those are some pieces of her things. They were really like a paper architecture Olympics, where Deborah Sussman, along with John Dirty and some other people, kind of changed the whole city for a week or so with these scaffolds and paper installations, and really a very strong palette that kind of came to be what we think of as the palette of the 1980s. That color palette became like one of LA's biggest exports, at the time, and really put the city on the map in a different kind of a way than it had been before. And so these are sonotubes, painted and wrapped in stickers and stuff. And I just thought this work was so great, and I was shocked I couldn't find it. So we did a show. Deborah was still alive. She passed away, unfortunately, soon after. I think she did that wild sign in Cincinnati, the lit thing that says Cincinnati that you see off the highway. But happily, her work got archived by the Getty and LACMA as a result, and she's in Wikipedia now, and there's a lot of articles about her. So that I guess I'm saying it because you all should do that. Like, it's kind of a good thing to do. Is people that you like, regardless even of gender, but 20th century people are kind of not getting. Design history is hard to maintain in the digital era unless people are writing new things about work that's happened before. So this is a design project. We did not curate this, but I designed an exhibit for a show about Lena Bobardi and Albert Frei that was at the Palm Springs Art Museum just a few months ago. And it was part of the Getty PST series where they were kind of looking at Latin America and art, and there was a kind of interesting, so a little bit of crossover between Lena Bobardi and Albert Frei in Palm Springs. And what I tried to do to organize it was the artifacts often for architecture, as I'm sure you know, are often a little dry for the regular viewer. They're drawings, maybe there's a model, it's often black and white. And so we wanted to give a stronger sense of the work of these architects. And one way in, I thought, was the palette that they used. Like, Albert Frei is sort of known for these circular windows, and his own house has this kind of remarkable turquoise and yellow, and Palm Springs City Hall. Lena Bobardi, I bet, influenced this building, but an amazing architect in Brazil, and she's got very kind of bolder colors, but also some really interesting shapes, like these kind of shapes that look like a comic book, pow through a wall. And so I took, this is sort of Lena Bobardi and Albert Frei colors, but this is the Lena Bobardi palette that we were using, and we kind of took the idea of the shape and the color to organize the exhibit. Oh, sorry, that was Lena Bobardi. So this is the Albert Frei palette. And then we sort of built a couple of walls and some tables and used a lot of vinyl on the floor as well to kind of create this immersive experience where basically one architect was on one angle through this space and the other, and they sort of bleed through each other in the middle. So this is in Bobardi looking at Frei. But and these are some of her furniture pieces. This is Frei, not really looking at Bobardi, but. And I think it was successful because it did also, I think a lot of people that saw it that are, let's say, civilians, not architects, kind of, hopefully we kept them there more to look at the work of these remarkable architects. While in Palm Springs, I've been working on a project near that, which is a kind of weird new kind of hotel based on the concept of Airbnb, where you rent a 5 or 6 bedroom villa as your room. So you sort of create a vertical sort of Palm Springs hacienda, condensed, verticalized, with pools either in the back or on the roof. And it's kind of organized along an interior street, slightly related to Blackbird's, but something that where you could use the whole thing as a wedding, or you could have the farmer's market there. So this is sort of the overall view of it. Each of these structures is an independent room that you would rent, and there's sort of probably shutting down Airbnb in Palm Springs soon. People get mad about people rent, like 20 people going to Coachella renting a house in the kind of spread out residential neighborhood. So the idea was like take that kind of strategy and turn it into something different. So there's pools on the roof and so on. And then this, I think while I was in Palm Springs so much, I was looking a lot at Albert Frei and kind of thinking about California modernism and its sort of formal vocabulary. And I got this fun project in Napa Valley, which is a winery that is called Ashes and Diamonds, and the client really wanted a California design-centric winery. I think if you've been to Napa Valley, a lot of the wineries there are kind of inspired by Renaissance Italy or, French chateaus. And this was the site kind of to the in the middle there. And so we were given both the landscape commission and the architecture. And so there's a big part of it is the production place, which is, has to be a relatively inexpensive thing, but there's sort of like a big chunk of production. And then there's also hospitality, which is where all the sales and the kind of drives the income of the winery. This is our plan realized. So on the left is the production zone and our hospitality space, and then the landscape that we built around it as well. And this also being slightly set back from the main highway in Napa, in a way the building kind of had to act as a sign for itself. You can't really do regular signage in Napa due to restrictions, so the building had to be probably more Venturian than your average building in terms of speaking to the passersby. And on the production side, I kind of pulled some of it out to do a little bit of hospitality space underneath it as well. And then the inside, this is the crush pad and some of the tanks and how the wine is actually stored. So that's all a very, relatively inexpensive metal building, and then just kind of manipulating the edges that are part of the more public face. This is a hospitality zone inside the production space. And then the main hospitality building is a very simple structure. It's almost like a kind of expanded living room alone, and then with a shade structure over it that acts as that sign. And the shade structure is perforated. It does get incredibly hot in Napa, so you sort of create this shade. We've created this shade zone outside. And on the inside, much more of a obvious nod to kind of classic modernism and the, let's say, the Julia Schulman kind of view of things, but in a kind of unorthodox landscape. So this is inside hospitality. There's a bunch of different public spaces in the landscape as well, and using the production building as the backdrop for projections. And that's it at twilight. And that is my last slide. So that's kind of looking from the landscape at the hospitality building. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer some.
For the sake of avoiding awkward silence or something else, this is not a very serious question, but you seem to have a lot of fun. And as an emerging practitioner, sometimes I may take things a little seriously. So how do you sort of let yourself play and not take yourself so seriously? I know you care a lot about art, I'm not saying don't take it seriously, but your work sort of expresses the fun side, or as Todd said, you're just kind of cool. So, what's your design process like? And, how do you interact with staff? How do you just have fun practicing?
Well, I come from like let's say, a super nerdy, serious architecture fangirl background. I mean, I've been studying architecture since I was in high school. So I guess I felt at some point though, and I think it has to do with building that first house for myself, because I'd already been a professor for maybe 10 years before I did that. And I had a little bit of the screw it attitude at that time because of this divorce, to be honest. And I had been following all the rules, and I did like beautiful white boxes that were very, serious. And I just was I was like, I think I'm just going to go to art school, forget it. And then I kind of got a couple jobs, and I said, like, well, what if I try to do just whatever I want to do instead? So it's a little weird because not everyone has that freedom, or has that. I mean, most of us, I think, who come to architecture come from probably obsessive personality types, and we're very serious, and we like the rules. There's a lot of rules, So I guess I a long time ago, when I was much more serious, I think I saw Gary give a lecture at the GSD like in the 80s or something, and he didn't say anything. He was just like, yeah, so this is I did this as a mall, you know, and I was like, how can he do that? But in a way, I kind of feel like I've started to train myself to act that way because it actually works better for clients. And it is kind of a way of looking at it at the profession where in the end the results do matter, you know, a lot more than the process in terms of how it works in the world. And so I'm pretty controlling and specific about like what actually happens, but I don't think I have to rationalize it as much as I probably used to, or as I could if I was forced to. I could you know, go down a different road of how to articulate work. But a lot of times I get asked to lecture as like this representative of California-ness or something, and so I sort of play along with that. Yes.
I'm a civilian, so please apologize. You started with Baumer, Harvard dropout, and of course on a day like today, when another Harvard dropout is sort of pretty prominent in reporting, like Zuckerberg, I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between social media and your work. You referenced the tiles as being most frequently Instagrammed. You referenced you did work for Snapchat. You referenced the Airbnb work. So when the platform economy is where it is today, how do you see work relating to dynamics in that space? Have you thought about sort of social media as a cross-cutting element in part of your work, and how do you see that moving forward?
Well, I guess I feel like well, not inevitably, but architecture often is like a subject in either in the background or it can be the object in social media. I don't think that's a very strong place for architecture to be. You know, I think that I feel like what I really feel is that my job as an architect is to work harder to get people's attention away from social media by giving them spaces that allow them to connect people or create community, stuff like that. That's kind of really what I'm trying to do. But I feel like you have to use some of those techniques in order to do that. Like you can't really seduce anyone as much by sort of a pure ondo zone these days as you maybe used to, because you know they've got like things bleeping all over the place. So I think I don't like anything. I hate stuff like the Museum of Ice Cream and stuff like that, like the things that are done purely for Instagram stuff. I think that's like incredibly superficial and horrible, and unspatial, frankly, and consumerist. But I do think that it is important to be pretty aware of how people get information now and how they see themselves in the world and how, you know, attached they are to those images. So I think it's an important, it's almost maybe more anthropological that we kind of have to look at what architecture does in that, not what it does in that space, but how it operates. You know, is architecture branding, and therefore, you know, you take a picture of the, I don't know, well, it's not a, you know, like whatever, the Eiffel Tower, and I'm embarrassed. Like that that would drive everything to be more iconic, monumental kind of architecture, which isn't necessarily so great for, you know, building community. But I do think that on the other hand, like pleasure and like play and you know, spaces that are fun or kind of, you know, brighten up your daily life in some way are really valuable. And sometimes that may mean that to me, that tile thing was like, it was right before all that stuff started, and it kind of was an early thing, and it, you know, became this kind of funny graphic that did have a lot of play in social media, but it sort of predated that even being an issue. Now I don't do that. I mean, I haven't used that kind of pattern tile in a long time because I'm like, oh, it's so played out. But you do sort of want to be aware of it. I guess the other thing I'll say is that the two-dimensional thing, the idea that you can create atmosphere through two-dimensional things is, I think, an important strategy in a world where budgets aren't that high and material and labor is only getting higher. So being able to look at, you know, pattern or wallpapers or murals or whatever, like as something, or color as a way of creating sort of spatial significance, I think is a good thing to also put in your toolkit as an architect. Thank you.